It was an ordinary June morning in 1912, and the small town of Villisca, Iowa, was just waking up. The sun shone brightly on the quiet streets, and everything seemed peaceful. The air was fresh, and the town's usual sounds filled the space: the chirping of birds, the rustling of trees, and the hum of daily life. But in the Moore household, everything was still. The Moore family was well known in the village. Josiah Moore, the father, was a respected businessman, and his wife Sarah took care of their 6 children. They were a happy, loving family, living in a cozy house on 2nd Street. But on this particular morning, the usual sounds of the Moore home were absent. Mary Peckham, a neighbor who lived nearby, noticed the strange silence first. It wasn't like the Moore family to sleep in. By now, Josiah and Sarah would be up, taking care of their children and preparing breakfast. But there was nothing. No movement, no sounds from inside the house. Mary thought it was odd and decided to check on them. She went to the Moore house and knocked on the door. She waited, expecting to hear someone inside, but there was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. A feeling of unease started to settle in her stomach. Mary knew something wasn't right. Worried, she went to find Josiah's brother, Ross Moore, who lived nearby. She told him about the strange silence, and they decided to use Ross's spare key to open the door. When they stepped inside, they were immediately hit with an eerie silence that felt wrong. Ross walked through the house, looking for any sign of the family. He started in the kitchen, then moved toward the back rooms. It didn't take long for him to find something horrifying. In the guest bedroom, he saw the 2 Stillinger sisters, Ina May and Lena, who had stayed over for the night. They were lying motionless on the bed. At first, Ross thought they were just asleep, but as he stepped closer, he realized they were dead. The panic started to set in. Ross immediately turned and ran to the other rooms of the house, checking on the rest of the family. But what he found was even worse. In each room, the bodies of Josiah, Sarah, and their 4 children were scattered around. Every single one had been violently murdered. They were all struck with an axe. The scene was shocking. But what made it even more terrifying was the way everything had been arranged. The killers seemed to have taken their time, covering their tracks. The axe, the weapon used to kill them, had been carefully wiped clean of fingerprints and placed in the guest room. The mirrors in the house were covered with sheets, as if to avoid any reflection. Even the water in the tubs had been drained. It was almost as though the killer had tried to erase all signs of their presence. Mary and Ross didn't know what to do. They had never seen anything like this before. They immediately left the house and ran to the local sheriff's office to report what they had found. The sheriff and several deputies arrived soon after, but by the time they reached the house, the killer was already long gone. The investigation began, but there were no easy answers. Who could have done this? Why would someone commit such a brutal crime? And how did they manage to cover their tracks so well? These questions haunted the authorities as they combed through the scene, looking for any clue that could lead them to the killer. But the investigation quickly turned into a mystery. Despite questioning dozens of people and following up on several leads, the authorities couldn't find any solid evidence. No one saw anything suspicious, and there were no fingerprints or signs of forced entry. It was as though the killer had vanished into thin air. As the days passed, rumors and theories began to spread. Some believed the killer might have been someone close to the family, while others thought it was an outsider who had targeted them for reasons no one could understand. Some speculated that the murders were part of a larger pattern, a series of similar crimes committed by the same person. But no matter how hard they tried, the police couldn't crack the case. The Moore family's tragic deaths would become one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history. To this day, no one knows who killed the Moore family or why. The case remains a chilling mystery, with few answers and many questions that will never be answered. But before we dive in, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Trust me. The entire Moore family was found dead, each person struck in the head with a blunt object. The killer, or killers, had left no survivors. The bodies of Josiah and Sarah Moore, as well as their 4 children, were discovered in their respective beds. Each victim showed signs of extreme violence, with their faces so severely mutilated that it was difficult to identify them. The house itself revealed bizarre details. The killer had apparently waited in the attic until the family fell asleep, then went room to room, attacking the victims with an axe. After the brutal slaying, the killer returned to the master bedroom to strike Josiah and Sarah once more. Blood was found throughout the house, but notably, the murderer had been careful not to disturb objects or valuables. The Moore's watch, a symbol of their middle-class success, remained untouched. The fact that the murderer left the house nearly undisturbed made the crime even more puzzling. Some speculate that this could suggest that the murderer was familiar with the family, or that the killer's motive was psychological, not material. At first glance, the crime scene suggested a random attack, but upon closer inspection, investigators found details that pointed to a highly methodical execution. The killer had likely spent several hours in the house after committing the murders, as spent cigarette butts were found in the attic, suggesting that the killer had waited there for some time before leaving. Other strange details included a bloody basin of water in the kitchen and an untouched meal on the table. The killer had apparently taken his time to clean up and wash his hands, but then left without any signs of struggle, suggesting that the killer knew the family, or at least felt comfortable in the house. In addition to the bizarre scene, investigators noted the presence of a bloody piece of bacon which had been placed on the floor next to the axe. This odd placement of food raised further questions. Was it a deliberate act to confuse the authorities, or perhaps an indication of a disturbed mind? The lack of clear motive and the gruesome nature of the crime led many to believe that this was a highly personal attack. From the moment the bodies were discovered, the Villisca crime scene attracted a flood of local, state, and national investigators. The town of Villisca, a quiet rural community, had never seen such brutality, and the entire state of Iowa was shaken by the murders. Despite their best efforts, the authorities quickly ran into dead ends. There were no clear signs of forced entry, and no eyewitnesses came forward to offer any insight into the killer's identity. The initial investigation focused on the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, but when it was clear that nothing of value had been taken, the theory was abandoned. As the weeks and months went by, investigators continued to search for answers, but none seemed forthcoming. Over the years, many theories have been proposed about the identity of the killer. Several suspects emerged, though none were ever definitively linked to the crime. Reverend George Kelly. One of the most prominent suspects was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher who had been in Villisca the night of the murders. Kelly had a troubled history, with accusations of indecent behavior with young girls following him wherever he went. He had attended the Children's Day service at the Presbyterian Church, which the Moore family had also attended, and had left town just hours before the bodies were discovered. Kelly had been seen acting suspiciously in the days before the murders, and after his arrest for unrelated charges, he was questioned in connection with the Villisca killings. Kelly even confessed to the crime in a series of letters and interviews, but there was little evidence to support his claim. He was ultimately tried twice for the murders, but both trials ended in a hung jury. To this day, Kelly remains a controversial figure in the case, with many believing that he was either the killer or that he had knowledge of the crime. Frank F. Jones. Another theory suggested that the murders were motivated by revenge. Frank F. Jones, a local businessman and politician, had been in a bitter rivalry with Josiah Moore. Moore had worked for Jones for several years before leaving his employment to start his own successful business. The two men had clashed over several issues, and there were rumors that Moore had an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law. The animosity between Jones and Moore was well known, and many speculated that Jones may have ordered the killings in revenge. However, there was no concrete evidence linking Jones to the crime, and the theory remains a matter of speculation. Some believe Jones may have hired a hitman to carry out the murders, while others think he may have had a more direct hand in the crime. William Mansfield. Another suspect, William "Insane Blackie" Mansfield, was a convicted killer with a history of violence. Mansfield was linked to several other axe murders across the Midwest, all of which occurred under similar circumstances to the Villisca murders. Investigators noted that the murders in Colorado, Kansas, and other nearby states followed a similar pattern, and some speculated that Mansfield may have been a serial killer. However, no solid evidence ever tied him to the Villisca case, and he was never charged with the crime. The man from the train theory. In recent years, a new theory has emerged surrounding the Villisca murders, proposed by authors Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James in their book, The Man from the Train. The authors suggest that the killer was a man named Paul Mueller, a German immigrant with a history of axe murders. According to their research, Mueller was responsible for a series of similar murders across the country during the early 1900s. They argue that the Villisca murders were part of a larger killing spree, and that Mueller may have been a serial killer operating across several states. While the theory has gained traction among some true crime enthusiasts, it remains unproven, and the case of the Villisca Axe Murders remains officially unsolved. The Villisca Axe Murders remain one of the most puzzling and gruesome crimes in American history. With multiple suspects, conflicting theories, and no clear resolution, it's a case that continues to fascinate. As more details and theories emerge, the search for answers remains a compelling mystery, and the story of the Moore family and the Stillinger sisters continues to echo through the halls of history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of America's most notorious unsolved crimes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts or theories about the case. Have you ever heard of any other chilling unsolved murders that deserve a closer look? Let us know.